The heater in my truck gave out somewhere around Chattanooga. I noticed it the way you notice most things after 64 years of living slowly, then all at once. First a rattle behind the dash, then a clicking sound like a playing card in a bicycle spoke, then nothing but cold air pushing through the vents no matter how far I turned the dial. Outside, the sky had gone the color of old pewter, and the rain that had been following me since I left home in Murfreesboro had turned to sleet somewhere on I-24, coating the windshield in a thin glaze that my wipers could barely manage. 7 hours. That was how long the drive to Atlanta was supposed to take on a clear day. On a day like this one, with my right knee aching the way it always does before a storm and my fingers going stiff around the steering wheel, it was going to take considerably longer. But my granddaughter Emma was turning 6 years old on Saturday, and I had promised her I would be there. I want you to think about that for a moment, because I think it matters. I had made a promise to a 6-year-old girl who still believed that promises meant something. Emma had called me the week before, her voice tiny and serious the way children's voices get when they are trying to sound grown-up, and she had said, "Pa, you're coming to my party, right? You have to come, Pa. You have to." And I had told her yes. I had told her I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. Tell me in the comments if you have ever driven through an ice storm because you couldn't stand the thought of letting a child down. Tell me if you know what it feels like to be the only person in a little girl's life who always shows up. I pulled off the highway outside of Dalton to fill the tank and buy a cup of coffee from the gas station that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since Tuesday. My knee screamed when I climbed back into the cab. The arthritis had been worse this year. My doctor had told me in September that the cartilage in my right knee was, in his words, significantly degraded, which is the medical way of saying that the thing that used to cushion the joint was mostly gone, and bone was grinding against bone every time I bent it. He had wanted to schedule surgery. I had told him after the holidays. I had things to do before I let anyone cut me open. I sat in that parking lot with both hands wrapped around the paper cup and watched the sleet come down and thought about my son. My son's name is Marcus. He is 37 years old, and he lives in a neighborhood in Buckhead where the houses have 3-car garages and the lawns are so perfectly maintained that they look artificial. He is an investment manager at a firm downtown. He wears suits that cost more than my first car, and he drives a black Range Rover that he parks in one of those 3-car garages alongside his wife Diana's white Mercedes. I want to be fair to Marcus because I love him. I have always loved him. I worked overtime for 17 years as a general contractor so that he could go to Georgia Tech without taking out loans. I paid for his wedding when Diana's parents made it clear that they considered our family beneath their expectations. I signed over 40 acres of farmland outside of Lewisburg 3 years ago, good land that had been in my family since my grandfather broke it himself, so that Marcus could use the equity to start his own investment fund when the firm where he worked started having trouble. I did these things because he was my son, and because I believed that the people we love deserve our sacrifice. I pulled back onto the highway. By the time I reached the Buckhead exit, the sleet had turned back to rain and the temperature had dropped another 4 degrees. My knee was a steady, burning complaint. I had my old Carhartt jacket zipped up to my chin, but the cab of the truck was cold enough that I could see my breath, faint and white, every time I exhaled. Marcus's house appeared at the end of the driveway like something from a magazine. Every window was lit up. I could see Christmas lights strung along the roofline even though it was only the week before Thanksgiving, because Diana liked to decorate early. There were 2 other cars parked on the street outside. I recognized Diana's mother's Cadillac and a silver Audi that I didn't know. I parked behind the Cadillac and sat there for a moment, letting the engine idle. Emma's birthday party wasn't until Saturday. I had arrived Thursday evening, earlier than Marcus had been expecting me. I had called that morning to say I was on my way, but the call had gone to voicemail, and I hadn't tried again because driving in sleet requires both hands on the wheel and all of your attention on the road. I reached into the back seat for the present I had brought for Emma, a wooden dollhouse that I had spent 4 weekends building in my shop, painting it yellow with white trim because she had told me on the phone that yellow was her favorite color. It was wrapped in paper that had little birthday cakes on it, slightly crumpled from the drive. I tucked it under my arm and pushed the truck door open with my shoulder. The front door was unlocked. Marcus and Diana never locked their front door during the day, which had always struck me as the kind of casual carelessness that only comes with feeling very safe and very certain that nothing bad will ever happen to you. I turned the handle and pushed it open, and a wave of warm air hit my face that made my eyes water after 7 hours of cold. I stepped into the front hall. I could hear voices from the living room, around the corner, and down the hall. Several voices, talking over each other, the way people do when they are in the middle of something they care about. I recognized Diana's voice, precise and clipped the way it always was. I recognized the lower murmur of someone I didn't know, and I recognized my son's voice. And what my son's voice was saying stopped me where I stood. The whole thing is basically already drafted. Gerald said the filing takes about 2 weeks once we submit the evaluation. A woman's voice I didn't know said, "And you're certain the evaluation will go your way?" Gerald says the evaluator he uses is very thorough, very cooperative. Marcus paused. Pa's been showing signs for over a year. Forgetting things. Showing up at the wrong time. His doctor is already on record saying the knee surgery is being postponed because Pa keeps changing his mind about the date. That's not exactly a cognitive. It doesn't have to hold up in court forever, Diana said, and her voice was smooth and unbothered, the way her voice always was when she was explaining something she considered obvious. It just has to hold up long enough for us to get conservatorship. Once we have conservatorship, the rest of the property transfers automatically under the terms of the existing agreement. The Lewisburg land, the timber rights, the account in his name that he thinks nobody knows about. Silence. Then the voice. I didn't know. The silver Audi. I realized. An attorney, or an accountant, someone brought in for this specific conversation, said, "What about the granddaughter? Emma? Emma is not a factor," Diana said. "She's a child. She doesn't know anything about any of this." I stood in the front hall of my son's house with a yellow dollhouse under my arm and ice melt dripping from my boots onto the hardwood floor, and I did not move. My son said, "We just need him to sign the voluntary evaluation consent. Once he's here for the party on Saturday, Diana's mother can keep him occupied while Gerald's person does the preliminary screening. Pa trusts her. He'll do it if she asks him." I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because I think precision matters when the thing you are describing is a kind of pain that doesn't have a clean name. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something quieter and more devastating than anger. It was the specific grief of understanding that the story you have been telling yourself about your life, about what your sacrifices meant, about who the people you love actually are, was a story you had written alone. My son was going to have me declared mentally incompetent so that he could take the rest of what I owned. I thought about the 40 acres in Lewisburg. I thought about the 16-hour days I had worked the summer Marcus was 12, the summer I had taken on 4 jobs simultaneously because we were 3 months behind on the mortgage, and I had refused to let us lose the house. I thought about the calluses on my hands that had never entirely gone away, not even now, not even after I had retired. I thought about Emma, who had called me and said, "Pa, you have to come." And then I closed the front door very quietly, walked back to my truck, and I made 3 phone calls. The first call was to my attorney. His name is Dale Whitfield, and I have known him for 22 years. He picked up on the second ring, which is what he does when he sees it's me, because we had spoken the previous week, and he had told me to call if anything developed. I told him what I had heard. He told me he would be in Atlanta by Saturday morning. I told him to bring everything. The second call was to my brother James, who lives in Marietta, 40 minutes from Marcus's house. James is 68 and retired, and he has never in his life been asked to do something small. I told him I needed a place to sleep for 2 nights, and I told him why. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I'll put the coffee on." That was all he needed to say. The third call I made sitting outside my brother's house, after I had driven across Atlanta in the dark, and the rain with my knee aching and my hands finally starting to warm up again. The third call was to a number I hadn't dialed in a long time, the direct line of a man named Arthur Pemberton, who manages a real estate portfolio in Nashville that includes, among other things, the development rights to a stretch of farmland outside of Lewisburg, Tennessee. Arthur and I had spoken 4 months ago, I had asked him then to hold off on formalizing our agreement. Now I told him I was ready to proceed. He told me the offer was still on the table, $12 million for the development rights on the full parcel, with the deed remaining in my name. I thanked him and told him to have the paperwork ready by Monday. James's house was warm and smelled like the chili he had made for dinner, and his wife Carol put a bowl in front of me without asking and poured me a glass of sweet tea. And I sat at their kitchen table and ate and did not say very much, because there was not much left to say. James sat across from me and drank his coffee and looked at me the way he has looked at me our whole lives, with the steady, matter-of-fact attention of someone who is not going anywhere. "You okay?" he asked, after a while. "I'll be okay on Sunday," I said. Saturday morning, I called Marcus. I told him I was already in Atlanta, that I had arrived the night before but hadn't wanted to bother anyone so late, and that I was looking forward to seeing everyone at the party. He sounded surprised, and underneath the surprise I could hear something else working a rapid recalculation, the sound of a plan being adjusted in real time. He told me to come over at noon. The party was at 2. Dale Whitfield arrived at James's house at 10:30 with a leather briefcase and a pressed shirt, and the particular calm expression he wears when he is about to do something that cannot be undone. He had 2 documents with him. The first was a comprehensive cognitive evaluation, a real one, administered by a licensed neuropsychologist who owed Dale a favor and had driven down from Knoxville that morning. She sat across from me at James's kitchen table and spent 45 minutes asking me questions. And at the end of it, she signed a document that stated, in the language of her profession, that I demonstrated no measurable cognitive impairment of any kind. The second document was a power of attorney irrevocable, already filed with the county clerk that morning, naming James as my legal representative in all financial matters. Not Marcus, not Diana, James. I arrived at Marcus's house at noon wearing the same Carhartt jacket, the same worn boots, the same face I have been wearing for 64 years. Dale parked around the corner. I told him I would text him when it was time. Emma found me in the front hallway before I had taken my jacket off. She came running from somewhere in the back of the house, in a yellow dress, her favorite color, with her hair done up in 2 braids and a purple birthday crown tilted sideways on her head, and she crashed into me at full speed and wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "Pa, you came, you came, you came," as if she had not been entirely certain I would. I held on to her for a long moment. She smelled like birthday cake frosting. "Of course I came," I told her. "I said I would, didn't I?" Diana appeared from the kitchen, and her smile was the particular kind of careful, practiced smile that takes years to perfect. Behind her came her mother, Margaret, who greeted me warmly and took my jacket and guided me toward the living room. Exactly as Marcus had described on Thursday: keep Pa occupied, keep Pa comfortable, let him feel trusted. I let her guide me. I sat in the armchair by the window and I drank the coffee she brought me, and I watched the party fill up around me, the other children from Emma's kindergarten class, the parents I didn't know, Diana's brother and his wife, Marcus's colleagues who had been invited because Diana liked to use Emma's birthday as a social occasion. There was a man I didn't know sitting near the fireplace. He had a soft, forgettable face and a canvas messenger bag and the careful posture of someone trying not to be noticed. He glanced at me twice in the first half hour. I glanced back once, so he would know I had seen him. At 4 o'clock, after the cake and the candles and the presents, Emma held the yellow dollhouse up and showed it to every person in the room, announcing to each of them that her pa had built it himself. Diana's mother settled into the chair beside me, with the particular warmth of someone about to perform a service. "You know," Margaret said, "Diana mentioned you've been having a little trouble keeping track of things lately. Appointments, dates. It's so common at our age. There's no shame in it. There's actually a lovely gentleman here today who does these simple little check-ins for seniors. Very relaxed, just a conversation. Would you mind terribly?" I looked at her. I have known Margaret for 11 years, and in that time she has never done anything without a reason. "I wouldn't mind at all," I said, "but maybe we should do it with everyone present. I'd hate for anyone to feel left out." I took out my phone and sent one word to Dale. "Now." He came through the front door 4 minutes later, briefcase in hand, And the look on Marcus's face when he saw Dale Whitfield walk into his living room was the look of a man watching a plan he has spent months assembling come apart in a single moment. Diana went very still. The man by the fireplace picked up his messenger bag and began moving quietly toward the door. But James, who had come in behind Dale, stepped into the hallway and blocked his exit with the patient, immovable presence of a man who spent 30 years working construction and has never in his life backed away from anything. "I think you should stay," James said pleasantly. "We're about to have a family conversation." I stood up from the armchair. My knee hurt. I did not let it show. I looked at my son. Marcus had his father's eyes. I have always known this, and it has always made certain things harder. He was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was a teenager, something young and caught and frightened beneath the expensive suit and the careful composure. "Pa," he started. "I'm going to talk for a few minutes," I said. "And then you're going to have the chance to say whatever you need to say. But I'm going first." The room had gone very quiet. The children had been moved to the playroom by two of the parents who understood instinctively that something serious was happening. Emma's purple crown was on the coffee table. I told them what I had heard. I did not raise my voice. I described it the way you describe something you have thought about for 48 hours until every word of it is perfectly clear. The conservatorship filing, the cooperative evaluator, Diana's mother's role, the account they thought I didn't know about. I watched Diana's face cycle through denial and calculation, and something that might have been, at the very edges, shame. When I finished, Dale set the briefcase on the coffee table and opened it. He explained the cognitive evaluation, first the real one, conducted that morning by a licensed professional, which found no impairment of any measurable kind. He set the signed document on the table. He explained the power of attorney next, irrevocable, already on file, naming James as my representative. He set that document on the table. Then he explained the development agreement with Arthur Pemberton, which I had authorized 2 days prior, which would generate $12 million in proceeds that would be held in a trust structured specifically to prevent any claim by a conservator or legal guardian, named or otherwise. He set that document on the table. Marcus sat down on the couch. He sat down the way people sit down when their legs stop working properly. Diana said, "This is," and then didn't finish the sentence. I looked at my son for a long time. I thought about Chattanooga, and the heater giving out, and the sleet on the windshield, and the gas station coffee. I thought about 17 years of overtime and 40 acres of family land and a phone call from a little girl who said, "You have to come." "I'm not angry with you," I said, and I meant it, which is the strange part. I'm something, but I don't think it's anger. I think it's grief. I built things for you your whole life, not because I expected anything back, because I loved you, and I believed it was the right thing to do. And now I know that somewhere along the way, something happened to you that made you look at your own father and see an obstacle instead of a person. Marcus put his face in his hands. "The 40 acres will stay in my name," I continued. "The development agreement is with me, not with any fund or entity that you manage. The trust is structured so that those proceeds go, upon my death, to Emma directly, not to you, not to Diana, not to any entity you control. Dale will be in touch with your attorney to make sure everyone understands the new arrangement." Diana said, very quietly, "Marcus." He didn't look up. I picked up Emma's purple crown from the coffee table. I walked down the hall to the playroom, where Emma was sitting on the floor building something with blocks, and I knocked on the open door so she would know I was there. She looked up at me. "Pa, are you sad?" she asked, because children can see the things adults have learned to hide. I crossed the room and sat down on the floor next to her, which took considerably more effort than it used to, and I put the crown back on her head and tilted it so it was straight. "I'm okay," I told her. She considered this for a moment with the serious, evaluating look that she has had since she was an infant, old eyes in a young face, her grandmother's eyes, the eyes of a woman I still miss every single day. "Will you build blocks with me?" she asked. "That's exactly what I want to do," I said. We built a tower together on the playroom floor, Emma and I, while the adults in the living room had the conversation that needed to be had. The tower fell twice, and we rebuilt it twice, And each time Emma laughed and said again with the absolute certainty of someone who has not yet learned to be afraid of starting over. Dale drove back to Nashville that evening. James stayed for dinner, sitting at Marcus's kitchen table with the ease of a man completely comfortable in any room, eating the catered food that had been ordered for a party that had not gone as planned, talking to me about the farm and the winter and a fishing trip he wanted to take in the spring. Marcus came to find me before I left. He found me in the garage, checking the oil on my truck before the drive back to James's house, because the truck is old and it burns a little oil, and I check it every time I stop somewhere. He stood in the garage doorway for a moment, without saying anything. "I don't know how to explain it," he said finally. When I look back at the last year, I don't know who that person was. I don't recognize him. I put the dipstick back and closed the hood. "Then figure out who you are now," I said. "That's all any of us can do." He started to say something else, and then he stopped, and then he nodded, which was the most honest thing he had done in a long time. I drove back to James's house through Atlanta at night. The city lights blurred in the wet windshield, the heater still broken, my knee still aching. Some things don't fix themselves overnight. Some things take time and work, and the willingness to start over on a floor with a 6-year-old who doesn't yet know that towers fall. But I was warm enough. I had James's address in my head and coffee waiting at the other end. And I knew for the first time in a long time, I knew it with the certainty of something that has been tested and held exactly who I was and exactly what I had. I had built it all myself, and I was keeping it.